Sometimes the person who hurts you is the only one who ever truly saw you. The studio always smelled of turpentine, coffee, and rain. It was the kind of place where silence felt heavier than words, where every brushstroke carried a thought you couldn't quite say out loud. Elena moved through the space like someone trying not to disturb the air. There was grace in her stillness, in the way she leaned slightly toward the canvas, her brow furrowed in quiet focus. Her hair, that soft chestnut brown streaked with silver, was pulled back loosely, but a few strands always escaped, brushing against her cheek as she painted. I'd been working there for almost a year, the youngest assistant in the Community Arts Center, helping set up exhibits, stretching canvases, cleaning up after classes. I wasn't supposed to linger when the teachers stayed late, but Elena's evenings always felt different. Slower. Safer. We'd shared easy conversations once, nothing deep, nothing dangerous. She'd tell me stories about Italy, where she'd studied in her 20s, or about the students she'd mentored who went on to paint their own lives across cities I'd only seen in photos. I'd listen, half in awe, half pretending I wasn't. But lately, she'd gone quiet. The warmth between us had cooled, not vanished, but folded in on itself, like a flame under glass. That night, I was sorting brushes near the sink when I realized I hadn't heard her speak in almost an hour. Usually, she'd hum softly as she painted, or sigh at her own work, but there was nothing. Just the faint sound of rain against the window. I turned and saw her standing by the easel, staring at the painting but not really looking at it. Her shoulders looked tense, her hand frozen midair, brush hovering above the canvas as if afraid to touch it. I hesitated. Then I said quietly, "You okay?" She blinked, looked at me for the first time all evening. Her eyes were warm, but tired, the kind of tired that doesn't come from work. "I'm fine," she said, her voice soft. But it was the kind of fine that means anything but. I wanted to say something more, to break through whatever invisible wall had appeared between us, but I didn't know how. Instead, I busied myself with the brushes again, pretending not to notice the silence growing heavier. Then, without thinking, I reached across her table to grab a palette knife. My fingers brushed hers. Just for a second. She froze. And then, she pulled her hand back too quickly, almost sharply. I felt something twist inside me. She didn't say a word, but that small recoil said everything. The sound of the rain grew louder, or maybe it just felt that way. The warmth that used to fill the room was gone, replaced by something colder, quieter. I wanted to ask what changed. But the truth was, I already knew. Something between us had shifted, not broken, not yet, but tilted just enough that neither of us knew how to stand in the same light anymore. And as I packed up my things that night, I caught one last glimpse of her reflection in the studio window, her eyes distant, her face lit by the glow of her unfinished painting. Whatever she was feeling, it was still there. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I was part of it, or the reason for it. The next day, the rain had stopped, but the world still felt damp, like it hadn't quite decided whether to move on or stay stuck in yesterday. I arrived early at the studio, hoping the air would feel lighter if I got there before she did. But when I pushed the door open, Elena was already inside. The lamps were on even though sunlight streamed through the window, that soft, late afternoon kind of light that makes everything look a little too honest. She didn't look up when I came in. Just kept painting, her strokes slower, more deliberate. There was a stiffness in the room I didn't know how to name. So I did what I usually do when I don't know what to feel. I made a joke. "You're here early," I said, smiling a little. "Planning to hide all your secret techniques before I can steal them?" She didn't laugh. Didn't even smile. Her brush paused mid-stroke. She glanced at me, and the look in her eyes wasn't anger. It was something softer and much heavier. "Secrets," she said quietly, setting the brush down. "You think I keep secrets from you?" The air in my chest caught. I didn't mean it like that, not really. But something about her tone made me defensive. "I was kidding," I said too quickly. "You don't have to take everything so seriously." Her expression didn't change. She just looked at me for a long, steady moment. And then, she said something I'll never forget. "You're hurting me." It wasn't loud. It wasn't sharp. It was soft, heartbreakingly soft, like she didn't want to believe it even as she said it. The words hit me harder than I expected. I froze, caught between confusion and guilt. "I'm not," I started, but the rest of the sentence never came out. She turned away, wiping her hands on a rag that already carried the stains of 100 colors. Her shoulders lifted as if she were bracing herself against something invisible. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked. The soft scrape of the brush against canvas filled the silence. And in that sound, I heard everything we weren't saying: the distance, the frustration, the quiet longing we kept trying to hide behind polite smiles. I watched her paint, the way her hand trembled just slightly near the edge of the canvas. Every movement seemed deliberate, like she was painting her way through pain. I wanted to apologize. I wanted to tell her I didn't mean to hurt her, that I didn't even understand how I could. But instead I just stood there, clutching a rag that smelled like turpentine and regret. The silence between us stretched until it became unbearable. When she finally spoke again, her voice was calm, too calm. "Maybe you should take the rest of the evening off," she said. I nodded, even though part of me wanted to stay. Wanted to fix it. But my pride, or maybe my fear, wouldn't let me. As I walked out, the door creaked softly behind me. And though she didn't look up, I knew she heard it. Sometimes the quietest words leave the deepest wounds. And that night, her words, "You're hurting me," replayed in my mind until they didn't sound like hers anymore. They sounded like mine. For 2 days I didn't see her. Not at the studio. Not in the cafe she always stopped by before her evening class. Not even a glimpse through the fogged-up windows when I passed by after closing. It's strange how silence can start to sound like a person's name when you miss them. When I finally did see her again, it was by accident. The rain had returned, thin, cold sheets of it, and I ducked into the studio just to get out of the storm. I didn't expect the lights to be on. She was standing by the window, a mug in her hands, watching the rain the way someone watches an old memory. She looked tired, but not in a way that sleep could fix. For a few seconds, I thought about leaving, pretending I hadn't seen her. But my feet stayed where they were. My heart did too. She turned when she heard the door close behind me. Her expression didn't change, but I could tell she'd been crying. Not fresh tears, the kind that leave a faint shadow beneath your eyes, the kind that dry before you even notice. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. "I know." I swallowed. "I just needed to talk." She set her mug down on the windowsill, then folded her arms, as if trying to hold herself together. "About what?" "About what you said." Her jaw tensed, but she didn't speak. "You said I was hurting you," I continued. "But you didn't ask what it felt like to be on the other side of that." The words came out harsher than I meant them to. I wasn't angry at her, not really. Just at the way she could still affect me with a single look, a single silence. She blinked slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant to." I laughed, a small, bitter sound that didn't feel like mine. "Neither did I." That's when I said it. The words that had been burning a hole in my chest since the night she pulled her hand away. "Now you know how it feels." They slipped out before I could stop them, raw, trembling, cruel in their truth. Her breath caught. For a moment, she just stood there, eyes wide, lips parted as if the air had been knocked out of her. The rain against the window grew louder. And in that silence, I realized what I'd done, how something as small as a sentence could split a fragile connection wide open. She looked down, one hand gripping the edge of the table. "I didn't know you were hurting," she whispered. "You never said?" "I didn't know how," I said quietly. "Every time I wanted to, you looked at me like I was just someone passing through your world. Someone who didn't belong long enough to matter." Her eyes lifted, soft and wet with unfallen tears. "You mattered." The words broke something open in me, something I didn't know I'd been holding. But before I could say anything else, she turned away, her voice trembling. I think you should go. So I did. And as the door shut behind me, the rain swallowed every sound, except her voice, still echoing in my head. You mattered. The studio looked different that night, quieter, colder. The usual hum of the heater had gone silent, and the lights cast long shadows across the floor, stretching toward her like something reaching for warmth. I hadn't planned on being there. I told myself I'd just left something behind, a sketchbook, maybe, but deep down, I knew I came for her. And she was there. Elena stood near the back of the room, her hands folded, a mug of tea untouched on the table beside her. She didn't move when I came in. Didn't even turn. I didn't think you'd be here, I said quietly. Her shoulders tensed. You left a mess on the counter. I was cleaning it up. Her tone was calm, polite, but something in it carried a blade. She didn't look at me, just kept staring at the blank canvas in front of her, the same one she'd been avoiding for days. I took a step closer. Elena, about what you said. She shook her head. Don't. That single word stopped me in my tracks. Not because it was angry, but because it sounded tired. Defeated. I hesitated, searching for something to anchor the conversation. You said I was hurting you. Finally, she turned. Her eyes were red around the edges, not from crying, but from holding too much in. I don't want to fight, she said softly. We've both had enough of that in other parts of our lives. I'm not trying to fight, I said. I'm trying to understand. But the truth was, I didn't want to understand. I wanted to be understood. Her silence said everything, that careful, distant quiet that had been building for weeks. The same quiet that used to make me feel safe now made me feel invisible. And something inside me cracked. You think you're the only one who gets hurt here? I asked, my voice low but shaking. You pull away, you close off, and I'm supposed to just stand there and act like it doesn't matter. But it does, Elena. It does. She blinked, startled by the sudden weight in my words. I never meant to make you feel that way. Yeah, I said, a hollow laugh escaping. Now you know how it feels. The silence that followed was unbearable. It wasn't just a sentence, it was years of swallowed pride, of quiet longing, of pretending that admiration didn't ache like heartbreak. Her lips parted, but no words came. The studio felt smaller, the air heavier. The sound of rain hitting the windows filled the room like a pulse. For a moment, I thought she might yell. Or cry. Or say something to undo it. But she didn't. She just stood there, eyes shining in the lamplight, the soft tremor of her breath the only proof that she hadn't turned to stone. When she finally spoke, her voice was a whisper, fragile, trembling. You don't have to stay. I didn't argue. I couldn't. I walked toward the door, every step echoing louder than the last. And as I left, I caught her reflection in the glass, standing still, one hand pressed to her chest, as if trying to quiet a pain she didn't see coming. Outside, the rain washed against my face like it was trying to erase the words I'd said. But they stayed, heavy, bitter, and truer than I wanted them to be. Days passed. Not many, but enough for silence to take root in every corner of my routine. I still went to the art center, though I came earlier now, before her classes started. The studio looked different in the mornings, pale lights spilling through the windows, everything still and untouched. The smell of paint thinner mixed with dust instead of rain. I told myself I preferred it that way, the quiet. No tension. No unspoken words pressing between us. But that wasn't true. The silence didn't comfort me anymore. It haunted me. I caught myself noticing the things she'd left behind, a half-empty mug on the counter, a paint-stained rag folded neatly beside the sink, the faint imprint of her brushstrokes still visible on the drying canvas. Traces of her, quiet, constant, and impossible to ignore. Sometimes I'd see her from afar. At the cafe across the street, sitting by the window with her sketchbook. She'd stir her coffee absent-mindedly, lost in her own world. I never went inside. Just stood across the street long enough to feel foolish, then walked away before she could notice me. It's strange how absence changes the air around you. You start listening for footsteps that never come. You start remembering things you thought you'd forgotten. The way she said your name like it meant something. The way her laughter filled small spaces with warmth. One afternoon, I stayed late after everyone left. The studio was empty except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. I found myself sketching without thinking, lines and shapes that had no plan, no reason. And slowly, without realizing it, her face began to appear on the page. Soft eyes. A calm mouth that never said everything it wanted to. I stared at the drawing for a long time. Then I tore it out. Because that's what you do when something feels too close. You destroy it before it reminds you what you've lost. When I threw it into the trash, the sound felt louder than it should have. I left the studio and walked through the park nearby. The air was sharp with autumn, crisp leaves underfoot, the faint smell of wood smoke in the distance. I sat on the bench near the fountain where we'd once shared a quiet conversation about nothing and everything. That memory came back like a film replaying too slowly, her leaning back, smiling, the sleeve of her sweater brushing my arm. The moment had been nothing back then, but now it felt like the start of everything I missed. The truth was, I wasn't angry anymore. Not at her. Not even at myself. Just tired. Tired of the ache that came from pretending I didn't care. Tired of holding back every word I wanted to say. And yet, even in that exhaustion, a part of me still looked toward the art center in the distance, half hoping she'd walk by, half hoping she wouldn't. Because when someone has seen the most fragile parts of you, seeing them again feels like touching a wound that's still healing. It was late when I saw her again. The kind of late where the world starts to slow down, the streets empty, the lamps hum quietly, and the sky feels too big for one person to stand under. The art center was supposed to be closed, but through the window, I saw the faint glow of light. She was there. Elena stood by the easel, her hair tied loosely, sleeves rolled up, a brush balanced delicately between her fingers. The canvas in front of her was almost blank, just faint outlines, uncertain, hesitant. I hesitated outside the door, my hand resting on the cold metal handle. I could have turned back. I almost did. But something inside me, that stubborn ache that hadn't left since the night I hurt her, pushed me to go in. The door creaked softly as I stepped inside. She turned startled. "Oh," she said quietly. "It's you." Her voice wasn't cold, just cautious, like she was testing the air between us. "I didn't mean to interrupt," I said. "I just saw the light." She nodded, setting the brush down. "Couldn't sleep," she murmured. "So I came here." I thought maybe painting would help. I walked closer, the faint scent of linseed oil and her perfume wrapping around me like something familiar I wasn't supposed to touch. "Does it?" She gave a small, tired smile. "Not really." For a moment neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't sharp this time. It was fragile, tentative. Like a bridge that might hold if we both stepped carefully. I looked at the unfinished painting. "It's different from your usual work." "It's supposed to be," she said softly. "But I can't seem to start." Her eyes flicked to mine, just briefly. And in that second, everything we hadn't said hovered between us, the hurt, the misunderstanding, the words that cut too deep. "I never meant to hurt you," I said quietly. "That night I said things I shouldn't have. I was angry, and it wasn't really about you. Not all of it, anyway." She looked down, fingers tracing the edge of the canvas. "I know," she whispered. "I just didn't realize how much I'd been holding back either. I thought keeping my distance would make it easier." "Did it?" I asked. She shook her head. "No." I took a slow breath. "I didn't come here to make things harder. I just needed you to know that it mattered to me. You matter to me." The words hung in the air, soft but certain. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer, close enough that I could see the faint freckles along her cheekbone, the slight tremor in her hand as she reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You hurt me. But I hurt you too, didn't I?" I nodded. "Yeah." For the first time in weeks, she smiled, a small, fragile curve of her lips. Maybe, she said, we can start over. And somehow, that small sentence, that quiet suggestion, felt like the biggest apology in the world. The next evening, I found myself walking to the art center again. Not because I had to, but because some part of me needed to. Through the glass, I could see her, alone again, surrounded by half-finished canvases and jars of cloudy water. The light was warm and low, painting everything in amber. She wasn't working. Just standing there, staring at the painting from the night before, her arms folded loosely across her chest. I hesitated before going in. There's always a moment before forgiveness where the air feels fragile, like one wrong word could send everything back into silence. When I opened the door, she turned, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she smiled without hesitation. You came back, she said softly. I wasn't sure if I should. I'm glad you did. Her voice carried something lighter now, not joy exactly, but peace. A quiet peace that came from two people who had finally stopped running from what was real. I walked closer, careful not to break the calm between us. The smell of turpentine paint and her faint floral perfume filled the space between our words. She gestured toward the painting. I finished it. I stepped beside her. The canvas showed a woman standing near a window, her face half in shadow, half in light, her expression unreadable, caught between longing and strength. She looks... I started, but couldn't find the right word. Lost? She offered. I shook my head. Human. She smiled faintly. Maybe both. We stood there in silence, shoulder to shoulder. The warmth of her presence was so close, I could feel it even without touching her. It was the kind of closeness that made time slow down, not because you wanted it to, but because every small detail suddenly mattered. The hum of the lights. The way her breathing steadied. The faint tremor in my chest. I turned to her, and for a moment, our eyes met, really met. No shields. No pretense. She reached out, hesitating just long enough for me to notice the courage it took. Her hand came to rest lightly on my forearm, a simple, gentle touch, but it carried everything we'd left unsaid. It wasn't apology anymore. It wasn't explanation. It was understanding. I looked down at her hand, then covered it with mine. My thumb brushed softly across her knuckles, tracing the faint smudge of paint on her skin. Her eyes softened, her breath catching in that quiet way that happens when something long-awaited finally lands where it belongs. I missed this, she whispered. Me too. We didn't move closer. We didn't need to. The distance between us had already vanished in everything we didn't say. The world outside the studio felt far away, the rain, the city, the noise. In that small, paint-scented room, there was only us, the quiet thrum of our hearts, and a peace that felt almost sacred. When she finally pulled her hand away, she didn't step back. Instead, she smiled, calm, steady, and sure. And in that moment, I realized something simple but certain: forgiveness doesn't always arrive in words. Sometimes, it's just a hand that stays when it could have left.